In 2018, I was broke, and I look back at it and I refer to it as my struggle flakes era. I'd moved down to Southern California just the year before with all these lofty goals of creating content, and those dreams had just collapsed. My dad had just passed away, and I was living in Long Beach, working at an Urban Outfitters, and just doing small-time editing projects on the side just to pay rent. And I think what was most scary about all that is I was wondering if I had just burned 5 years of my life chasing the wrong dream. But 5 years earlier, I was Jay Kraken, a young up-and-coming EDM producer and DJ from Sacramento. I was topping Hype Machine, racking up a couple milli plays on my work, and yeah, I thought I was gonna make it. So how did I go from that to starting over completely lost and ending up here, now in 2025, a director of photography, doing work I love with people I care about and feeling like I've reconnected with a long lost dream? Spoiler alert, I didn't have a blueprint and things obviously didn't happen the way I planned, but they happened because I just kept going and trying and failing and pivoting and connecting. All that anime protagonist training arc shit. This is what it really looked like for me to figure everything out along the way. This is the story of how I've reinvented myself over and over again, and what I've learned about surviving as a creative. And if you're feeling like I did and you're chasing something that feels like it's falling apart, this is a gentle reminder that maybe you're just one reinvention away from finding out where you're really meant to land. All right, so with that said, brace yourself. Let me show you how I got here. So before we dive into the rise of Jay Kraken, let me paint you a picture. It's 2013, and I just successfully convinced my Filipino parents and received their blessing to pivot from being an accounting major to study film. And if you're Filipino, you already know that's a major achievement because from birth, you're expected to be like a nurse or lawyer or doctor or whatever the case is. That's just your destiny as a Filipino Pokemon master. I'm half joking, of course, but yeah, I was fortunate to have parents, mostly my dad, who supported my creative endeavors. Shout out to my mom too. So yeah, with that said, I became a film student at Sac State and I got my BA in film in 2014. But here's the plot twist. Instead of diving straight into filmmaking, I pretty much threw my film degree on the back burner to chase music. The very same year I had convinced my parents to allow me to pivot into film, I had also fallen in love with electronic music production, and I had fashioned the creative identity that I would become known for, Jay Kraken. And I remember spending almost every free period at the Sac State Union writing melodies, working on bootleg remixes, emailing blogs, and hitting up Hype Machine writers, just trying to break through with music. And slowly but surely I did. And I was getting tracks featured on blogs. I was building a fan base, gaining traction. I got to fly out and perform in Seattle, as well as TBD Fest in Sacramento. And for a while, I felt like I was on the right path. The reality of the situation was I had no idea or financial plan for any of this shit. I was making some money off of performing at shows and, getting stream royalties, but admittedly, I was still living with my parents and I was very privileged to have been able to do so. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to pursue music if it weren't for that. With that in mind, let me tell you, when I plateaued with music, which I did, I plateaued hard. There was this point where the numbers stalled, and it was kind of my first experience seeing how demoralizing it could be to watch your engagement or your plays on your music start to dip. And I guess that was also my first learning lesson. And when you're doing something just for the numbers, it really begins to feel like you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I began to have this sinking feeling, what if music isn't working out? And obviously, that's very scary and heartbreaking because at that point, Jay Kraken was the thing I'd poured all my energy into. And no one really talks about what happens when your dream stops working, especially when you're so sure and hyper confident it'll work out. And I feel like when you tie your identity to one creative pursuit like I did, hitting a plateau really feels like failure. And I thought quitting music meant quitting being a creative. If I didn't want that to happen, I still wanted to create as Jay Kraken. So I pivoted and reinvented myself. So fast forward to 2016, and I started this YouTube channel that you're probably on now, and J Kraken, the EDM producer, became J Kraken, the YouTuber. I was gaming, vlogging, playing Overwatch,
Welcome back to the stream. Today is another day of trying to escape from bronze hell.
And I do want to acknowledge for a lot of you watching me here now on YouTube, like whoever's still here, from the 23,000 subscriber or whatever I have, this is probably around the time where we met each other. Like the old J Kraken, the one you guys remember from the streams that was screaming and obnoxious.
I nearly died there. I jumped on my chair because I got hella scared. Come on, come on, come on. No! Fuck you, McCree! Go suck a massive Did we get it? Oh, nice one, guys. Let me get in the middle of this.
So you probably remember how this part of the story plays out. I'll just say, like, looking back at 2016 to 17, I feel like it was the golden era for YouTube. This was like peak Casey Neistat era. And I felt like there was this sense of opportunity and possibility. Like you could really make a living from doing YouTube at the time. So yeah, with that said, in 2017, I stepped out of the comfort of living with my parents and took a leap of faith and moved to Southern California, again with these big lofty dreams of making it as a YouTuber. And I really did imagine that life for myself, like being in the circle of creators, collaborating and featuring in each other's videos and pushing each other to make dope stuff. And you know, making that Google AdSense money and living that creative lifestyle. Shout out to the OG YTG fam. And for a while, it kind of worked. I built a small but engaged audience, and I was very fortunate to have a dope community here, you know, you guys. But passion wasn't enough, and just like with my music, my YouTube channel stalled. And I mean, I could blame it on the algorithm or whatever the case is, but I began to realize that YouTube, or at least at the level that I was playing at, just wasn't sustainable. I mean, I was barely making enough income from the streams. I was living off of like stream donations, some ad revenue from YouTube. And I remember at one point I even had to get into Postmates just to make ends meet, you know? And then that's when everything just started to collapse. My dad passed away shortly after I moved to SoCal. I was grieving, I was broke and lost, and eventually I couldn't pay the expensive rent in Huntington Beach. So I ended up relocating to Long Beach, and from that point on, it just became survival mode, you know, working retail, taking whatever editing jobs I could. And that's when I really started to question if I was cut out for any of this. It was at this point that I felt like I was really giving up on my dreams of making some kind of name for myself as a music producer or YouTuber or whatever the case is. I just wanted to create. And, at that point, I just felt like I had to kind of give up on that and grow up and get a real job. At this point, I just really needed to make money. And because I'd basically abandoned my film degree for 5 years, all I had to show for it was YouTube content if I was trying to show agencies, which doesn't exactly scream hire me to, production heads. But with that said, pursuing video production work still seemed like the most logical path to like getting a job, because I did have a film degree and I had done video work with YouTube, so I was just trying to salvage any progress I had made. And I had also started editing for others to stay afloat. My friend O'Nickel, who some of you may remember, he was a fellow YouTuber. He extended me the opportunity to work on his YouTube channel, which at the time was very much a lifeline for me to still continue fighting to live down here. And I'm still very grateful for that opportunity to this day. I had my Sony a7S Mark II, so I was taking whatever shooting gigs I could, even these sketchy ass ones in Hollywood. And I was literally on Craigslist every day, like with search terms saved for videographer, videography, video editor, just refreshing like a madman to find any opportunities I could take. And so after months of like scrounging around and just desperate to find any and all shooting, editing opportunities, it was around that time where I began to have a mindset and almost identity shift in a good way, because I was just so fed up with being broke. And I remember I was planning a Japan trip that I couldn't afford with my friend Ferg. We were looking at the numbers and I almost resigned myself to not going. We had this conversation where I was like, dude, I don't think I can afford this trip. But then it's crazy because almost immediately after, I think I was watching My Hero Academia and I was like, you know what?
Fuck this. I'm gonna manifest this shit.
And I shit you not, the opportunities did start to come up after that mindset shift. And I promise this isn't the crux of the video. There's not like, oh, miracles happen, that sort of thing. I mean, if you believe in miracles, that's great. And I think at the time for me, it did feel like a miracle. But the more important takeaway for me, at least at that time, was the shift in mindset. You know, the belief that I'm gonna make this happen is what really propelled me forward. To loosely quote James Clear from his book Atomic Habits, which really changed my life, when you're trying to achieve a goal or whatever the case is, sometimes it has to start in here with your identity, and then it no longer becomes a question of what do I have to do to achieve this goal. It more so becomes, who do I have to be? What kind of person do I have to be to not be broke and all that shit? And here's the thing, editing videography were only supposed to help me pay the bills or just to help me fund that Japan trip, but I began to realize I was getting really good at storytelling, pacing, and visuals, and those skills are what set me up for everything that came next. So by 2019, I was deep into video production and I had shifted from editing to becoming a shooter, and I was beginning to learn my camera like the back of my hand. And from 2019 to 2023, that's when everything began to change. And I don't mean just because of the pandemic. I began shooting corporate gigs, weddings, commercials, events. I was hungry to not only improve my skills, but I was also just fiercely determined to never be broke again. It was coming from a place of survival, but during this time, I began to learn to work with people from all walks of life. And I do want to note that the people skills I picked up during this season of my life were just as important, if not more important actually, than the technical ones I picked up on my camera. I feel like learning how to communicate effectively is largely how I've been able to really change my life. And this was doubly true in the years that followed. I feel like with both my technical and people skills improving, I was able to create more opportunities and negotiate higher paying rates for myself as a cinematographer. Fast forward to 2023 and 2024, these were like the breakthrough glow up years. I launched my production agency, Sonder Pop Pictures, and suddenly I found myself designing shots, crafting visuals, building full-scale productions, and I also began working with my friends at Awe Films, who would go on to become some of the most important people in my life today. David, Gene, Vic, you guys better be watching this. I just want you to know I love you guys so much, and I know we're all cooking hard, and I'm just so excited for what we're gonna continue to build as not only individuals, but as a collective as well. And I was reflecting on all of this whole last decade at the end of last year, and that's when I really understood every creative phase that we undergo stacks and builds up on the last. Music taught me I was meant to be a creative for life, or that's all I ever wanted to do. Reinventing myself and becoming a YouTuber taught me how to engage an audience. Pivoting into freelancing taught me how to tell stories and how to run a business and communicate with people. And now as a DOP who runs my own production agency and co-hosts a podcast, I feel like it's all come full circle. I mentioned earlier that when I first moved down to Southern California, what I really wanted was to be surrounded by other creatives, you know, collaborating, making videos, feeding off of each other's creative energy. And while it didn't necessarily happen through YouTube like I'd originally planned and hoped for, it happened all the same with my friends at Awe Films. And now I find myself shooting music videos, picking up vlogging again. I'm obviously making this YouTube video. We're having creative conversations and just pushing each other to improve. And these days, I feel like I'm living that dream that I was always chasing, just in a different form. And it all came from pushing through all the struggle flakes and just being willing to reinvent myself creatively. All that said, to all my creative peeps out there, especially if you're in your own struggle flakes era or season of life, I want you to know that you are allowed to evolve. You don't have to be just one thing or pigeonhole yourself into one creative identity. If my story is any indicator, reinvention isn't failure. It is survival, it's growth, and sometimes you have to reinvent yourself and you have to shed that previous creative identity to unlock that next level of growth. So if you're stuck or if you're chasing something that feels like it is falling apart, just remember that maybe you're one reinvention away from landing exactly where you're meant to be. Thank you all so much for watching and attending my TED Talk. It is crazy to look back on the last decade of life and come back here to YouTube, kind of where things started for me, at least when I moved down to SoCal. Also, it does feel kind of surreal making a video for the first time in like 4 years. I don't want to promise any sort of Jay Kraken comeback, but who knows? Maybe this is the start of my influencer era again, or I don't know. But with that said, drop a comment if you've been here since the EDM days or my obnoxious YouTube streamer days, or if you're new and you resonate with whatever I was talking about today. But yeah, until next time, I thought I'd run it back turbo to 2016 since we're all nostalgic here and say, be good. Whatever it is you got going on in life, make it a cracking one. And I will catch you guys, I don't know, maybe on another video. Who knows? Maybe we back, or maybe we're not. But until then, I love you guys. Peace.